Hello, hello, awesomes. It's Regina coming to you subsequent to the election on AWE Radio from my ABCD PNRM Talkcast. Shh. Let's talk about getting it together. Tuesday night, Georgia held the Senate runoff for Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock's seat, which would increase the Democrats' seats, giving them sole control or allowing the Republicans to pull even at 50-50, with the Democrats to return to the Senate, upper chamber of Congress, to a status quo of the first 2 years of the presidency. Results are in, and Reverend Warnock at 51.2% and 1.8 million votes beat his challenger, Herschel Walker, at 48.8% and 1.7 million votes, really for the second time in 5 weeks. 2.4% and 85,000 more votes on Tuesday, the 6th of December, and he really won with more votes on November 8th at 49.4% versus 48.5%, just 6/10 of a percentage point from the 50% threshold, and actually 9/10 of a percent higher than his opponent, except for the runoff requirement in Georgia. In 48 of the other states, he would have won outright. Georgia is only one of 2 states with this requirement, the other state being Louisiana. Now, democracy is stronger today than yesterday. Dems control the Senate, boosted by the win in Georgia, 51 and 49 for the GOP. The House fell to the Republicans. They've got 22.2 decided seats, and the Dems only 213. But President Biden still retains or is the president. He won't have to run until 2024, and he is running. Democracy is on the right foot, with everything pointing to the country's democratic principles, small d, not necessarily Democrats, meaning the Democratic Party, standing strong because the country is stronger together and we're all on the same page. The it today is Senate strong, moving forward toward true democracy, the judicial branch. Now, autocratic tendencies are still at play by MAGA Republicans, election deniers and such, and those that were elected, they're still doing what they do, duly empowered to do everything in the aforementioned title as, democratic democracy obstructionist. But the Democratic soft pedal approach from the Democrats and democracy defenders are, it needs some work as well. We must stop all of it and go on the offensive, Democrats, and versus defense, and be more proactive. A midterm update. Senate Dems are in control with 51 seats, and they'll have more power than ever. They'll be able to determine the power division between the Democrats and the GOP as they see fit. They'll put bills and programs up for vote that they had no chance of even getting on the floor previously, let alone up for a vote, and avert the anti-caucus support that jammed up efforts in a 50-50 Senate. The antagonist can be ignored or not given as much weight or power because of the extra seat and its effect on caucus dynamics. The caucus's ability to avoid holdouts, which cause delays or stoppages. Senate leadership. Dems, 51 seats. Senator Chuck Schumer retains majority leadership helm, as does Dick Durbin his role as whip. Also, the Democrats make history once again by nominating Senator Patty Murray, the first female president pro tem, the second highest ranking position in the Senate. Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution provides that the VP is the vice president, is the president of the Senate, and mandates that the Senate must choose a president pro tempore to act in the VP's absence. The GOP has 49 seats, the minority leadership, Mitch McConnell, minority leader, and John Thune, the whip. Now, the House GOP in control with 222 decided seats, but there's still concern whether, or not, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy can win the Speaker's gavel, and that the selection process scheduled for January 3rd could require multiple vote sessions to get someone selected. McCarthy is being challenged for the position by Representative Andy Biggs, who also challenged him during the conference vote, which is GOP only. Biggs got 30 votes to McCarthy's 108, neither enough to reach the requisite 218 required to take the gavel. The source there was MSNBC. The Dems at 213, they have the minority leadership, and Representative Hakeem Jeffries won that leadership position. He is the House Party leader. The minority leader elect is the first African American to serve in the position. Catherine Clark will serve as minority whip, the number 2 position, and Pete Aguilar, presumptive caucus chair. This is the most diverse leadership team in Congress. The results are greatly driving government effectiveness. Bipartisan or partisan governing, inclusive and positive or exclusive and destructive, inter or intra cooperation. Results in the state and local elections were a mixed bag. Battleground states went solely to the Dems, but other not so consequential states were successful in electing hard-right MAGAs and are engaging in more MAGA Republican politics. Candidates who lost their elections are continuing the voter denialism, dirty politics, refusal to concede or even acknowledge defeat, lies, and incitement of political violence. As mentioned last week, Arizona, where Democrats defeated most MAGA of the MAGA candidates, is taking the denialism to the nth degree. All 3 of the Arizona top leadership positions who lost to Dems but were 45 endorsed are being disputed. The governor and Secretary of State races are not just not being conceded, but unsubstantiated fraud and irregularity court cases filed. Cochise County, which refused to certify the election results, was ordered by the court and finally complied to certify the votes. Their voters' certification was completed in time for the state to meet its certification deadline and provide Arizona totals for the election. As stated last week, there are 7 articles. We've been through the first and the second, and today we're going to do Article 3, the judicial branch. The judicial branch, the 3rd article of the Constitution, outlines the powers of the federal court system, determines that the court of last resort is the U.S. Supreme Court, and that the U.S. Congress has the power to determine the size and scope of those courts below it. All judges are appointed for life unless they resign due to bad behavior. Those facing charges are to be tried and judged by a jury of their peers. The source there is the 7 Articles of the U.S. Constitution. And therefore, the judicial branch of the U.S. government interprets the meaning of laws, applies laws to individual cases, and decides if laws violate the Constitution. It is comprised of the Supreme Court, sometimes called SCOTUS, and other federal courts. The confirmation process for judges and justices. Appointments for Supreme Court justices and other federal judgeships follow the same basic process. The president nominates a person to fill the vacant judgeship. And then there is a review by the court. President nominates. Then it comes to the Senate Judiciary Committee. The nominations were under the provisions of the Constitution. One of the most important roles of the United States Senate is to advise and consent to presidential nominations. The Senate Committee includes nominations to the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, the U.S. Courts of Appeals, the U.S. District Courts, and the committee includes nominations for the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, as well as several committee nominations within the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Commerce, and others. Okay, so the president nominates a person, and the Judiciary Committee holds a hearing on the nominee and votes on whether to forward the nomination to a full Senate. If the nomination moves forward, the Senate can debate the nomination. Debate must end before the Senate can vote on whether to confirm the nominee. A Senate will request unanimous consent to end the debate, but any senator can refuse. Without unanimous consent, the Senate must pass a cloture motion to end the debate. And that's a procedure used in the Senate to place a time limit on consideration of a bill. Now, the cloture motion is sometimes called the Senate Rule 22. And in 1961, its author, Joseph Heller, introduced the Catch-22 into the American lexicon. That term referred to a fictional rule requiring repetitive behavior that leads to nowhere, meaning the filibuster, just keep talking until they really get tired. And that source was Representative John B. Lawson's homepage. Now, it takes a simple majority of votes, 51, which the Dems have, remember, if all 100 senators vote to pass cloture and end debate about a federal judicial nominee. Once the debate ends, the Senate votes on confirmation. The nominees for the Supreme Court or any other federal judgeship needs a simple majority vote. 51, there's that number again. See how much of a difference that one vote can make to be confirmed, for a federal judge to be confirmed. Now, how does the Supreme Court work? The highest court in the country, we know it's located in Washington, D.C. The head of the judicial branch of the federal government, its responsibility for deciding whether laws violate the Constitution, and in session from early October until late June, early July. How is a case received, or how does it get to the Supreme Court? Most cases reach the court on appeal. An appeal is a request for a higher court to review or reverse the decision of a lower court. Most appeals come from federal courts. They can come from state courts if a court deals with federal law. Rarely, though, is the court to hear a new case, such as one between states. Now, dissatisfied parties, please excuse my voice today again, petition the court for review. This is the parties may appeal their case to the Supreme Court, petitioning the court to review the decision of the lower court. Justices study the document, the justices examine the petition and supporting materials. They vote. 4 justices must vote in favor of the case to be granted review. Now, what happens once the case is selected for review? The parties make arguments. Justices review the written arguments and hear oral arguments. In oral arguments, each side usually has 30 minutes to present its case. The justices typically ask many questions. The justices will write opinions. The justices vote on the case and write their opinions. The majority opinion, shared by more than half of the justices, becomes the court's decision. Justices who disagree with the majority opinion write dissenting or minority opinions. Justices then issue their decision. They may change their vote after reading first drafts of the opinions. Once the opinions are completed and all the justices have cast the final vote, the court hands down its decision. All cases are heard and decided before summer recess. Every year, the court receives 7,000 to 8,000 requests for review and grants maybe 70 or 80 for oral argument. Other requests are granted and decided without argument. Let's talk about the justices. There are 9 justices, a chief justice who sits in the middle and is the head of the judicial branch, 8 associate justices. When a new justice is needed, the president nominates a candidate, usually a federal judge. The Senate votes to confirm them. The court can continue deciding cases with less than the 9, but if there is a tie, the lower court's decision stands. Justices are appointed for life, though they may resign or retire. They serve an average of about 16 years. Now, before we continue with our judicial entities, I'm going to tell you why I'm spending so much time on this article, branch of government. And I'm going to tell you up front, my source for this is the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union. This week, the Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments in Moore versus Harper, a North Carolina congressional gerrymandering case. North Carolina's legislative leaders are appealing a ruling from the North Carolina Supreme Court, striking down the state's congressional map as an extreme partisan gerrymander. The theory advanced by the legislators, if accepted, would radically reshape the workings of American government, which is why the ACLU and the ACLU of North Carolina and other legal partners filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court. The Moore case hinges on a legal proposition known as the independent state legislature theory. The theory asserts that when it comes to making state laws that apply to federal elections, from drawing congressional district lines to determining the who, what, when, where of casting a ballot, only the state legislature itself has the power to set the rules. Now, we talked about the Constitution setting up its structure to ensure that not one individual or one entity had infinite or sole power and no checks and balances. This is very pertinent here. The theory claims that the state legislature's power is so exclusive that they can ignore the requirements of their own state constitution, including the fair districting requirements that the North Carolina Supreme Court has enforced under its own state constitutional power of judicial review. That is not how our system works. Legislatures cannot ignore the Constitution to which they owe their very existence. They cannot act outside the law without any checks and balances, yet that is what the North Carolina legislators are asking the Supreme Court to give them. The power to set rules for voting and elections without state constitutional limits enforced by state courts. Proponents of the independent state legislature theory try to hang their hat on the U.S. Constitution, but their position is contrary to the Constitution's original and ordinary meaning. The framers fundamentally understood the power of legislatures to be drawn from and limited by written constitutions. They fought a war to break away from a runaway legislature, and they founded a new government based on the precept the legislatures and all government bodies can only act within the limitations placed on them by written constitutions ordained by the people. The suggestion that the framers trashed that fundamental principle when it comes to legislating the rules of democracy makes no sense. The theory is also contrary to the constitutional principle of federalism, whereby federal courts are bound to respect the various ways in which states organize their own governments and to allow the state lawmakers process, including activities by state courts, to operate without undue interference. Deferring to governmental arrangements set forth in state constitutions is a basic tenet of federalism. But the independent state legislature theory would require federal courts to constantly intervene in politicized conflicts between state legislatures and state courts over state constitutional matters. Let that sink in for a minute. And then to reorder the way that the checks and balances of state government are arranged in the state's own constitution, to put a thumb on the scale for the state legislature. That arrangement would dishonor federalism principles. But there's still more. If the court sides with state lawmakers in more, the result could have far-reaching impacts. State courts, governors, and redistricting commissions could also lose their power to invalidate, veto, or draw congressional maps. And the effects could apply well beyond gerrymandering, including dramatically changing how federal elections are conducted and giving state legislatures broad, unchecked power to set otherwise illegal election rules. This theory must be rejected regardless of any short-term partisan implications. Remember, state courts also struck down partisan gerrymanders this year in blue states as well as red states. In the end, it is our democracy that stands to lose if the power to set election rules is unconstrained by the rule of law and constitutional checks and balances. If the Supreme Court adopts the North Carolina legislators' proposed rule and more, it will make it even easier for state legislatures to suppress the vote and subvert election results. And it will give both political parties a green light to draw gerrymandered election districts. Adopting the legislator's rule would also require the courts to turn its back on principles ostensibly favored by its current majority, like original meaning and federalism, which stands against the legislators, radical and disruptive legal theory. More is an opportunity for the court to reject that radicalism and to reaffirm the common sense rule that has been in place since the Constitution was ratified. State legislatures always act subject to the state constitution that chartered them and defined their powers. Nothing less than that basic principle of American constitutional government is at stake. Now, I'd like to take a moment to focus on the highly politicized Supreme Court. Not my words, but the consensus of the nation, as apparent in the court's most recent decisions, having no resemblance of legal efficacy, but only partisan and political right-sizing of past issues, decided and long-time precedents that the conservatives vowed to overturn when politically acceptable, and 45 made it so. Here are the current 9 Supreme Court justices. Justice John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice, he was appointed in the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit in 2003. President George W. Bush nominated him as Chief Justice of the United States, and he took his seat September 29, 2005. He's a Harvard grad, law school grad. Clarence Thomas, Justice, Associate, attended Yale Law School. President Bush nominated him as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and he took his seat October 23rd, 1991. He, of note for Justice Thomas, is the Anita Hill sexual harassment allegations from 1991. He's the only black male justice on the court and husband of 45 election denier and participatory obstructionist Jenny Thomas. The source is News and Congressional January 6th Committee documentation. Samuel Alito, also an Associate Justice, attended Princeton Public and International Affairs in 1972 and Yale Law School in 1975. He was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit in 1990. President George Bush nominated him as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and he took his seat January 31st, 2006. Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor attended Princeton University, graduating summa cum laude, and a member of a sorority, the highest academic honor that Princeton awards, the Phi Beta Kappa. In 1979, she earned a JD from Yale, and she was the editor of the Yale Law Journal. In 1997, she was nominated by President Bill Clinton to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, where she served from 98 to 2009. And then President Barack Obama nominated her as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court on May 26, 2009, and she assumed this role August 8, 2009. Associate Justice Elena Kagan attended Harvard Law School in 1986, and she in 2009 was nominated by President Obama as the Solicitor General of the United States. A year later, the President nominated her as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and on May 10th, 2010, she took her seat. Neil Gorsuch, Associate Justice, got his degree from Harvard and also got a doctorate of philosophy from Oxford University. He was nominated by 45 as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and he took his seat on April 10th, 2017. Of note for his appointment, this seat was, my word, stolen from President Obama when the Senate refused to confirm his nomination of Merrick Garland, and the reason given was that they would not entertain a nomination so close to the end of the term and election. And this was March of 2016, and as we all know, the elections happened in November, so it was almost a year that they held that seat open and would not allow him to fill the position. Next associate is Brett Kavanaugh. He got his degree from Yale Law School in 1990. The 45th president nominated him as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and he took his seat on October 6, 2018. Of note with him was the sexual assault accusations presented during his confirmation in 2018, not yet litigated or resolved. Well, we did have some DOJ hearings, but it was not used to disqualify him from holding the seat. The next Associate Justice, Amy Coney Barrett. She got her degree from Notre Dame Law School. 45 nominated her as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and she took her seat on October 27, 2020. Now, with this seat, this was after the death of Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Through GOP Senate, though the GOP Senate had refused to act on Obama's nomination with almost a year left on his administration, surprisingly, when a GOP president was in office as 45 and only had about 60 days left in his term, in September of 2020, they accepted the nomination and confirmed her within 30 days. The rationale used was their ruling previously for President Obama only applied to Democratic presidential nominations. Last but not least, the newest Associate Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson. She received her law degree from Harvard. She was appointed by our current president, Joseph Biden Jr. He appointed her to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit in 2021, and then nominated her as the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in 2022. She took her seat on June 30th, 2022. She's the first African American female nominated and confirmed to the Supreme Court. Now, the nine justices court has a 6-3 conservative majority composition, very much thanks to 45, who nominated 3 of them with the help of the Federalist Society. Now, I'm going to quickly talk about the other federal courts and judicial agencies. But before I do that, I want to note that the 6 conservative justices were all nominated through the Federalist Society and post confirmation of 3 highly politicized justices. Okay, the Constitution gives Congress authority to establish other federal courts to handle cases that involve federal laws, including tax and bankruptcy. The Administrative Office of the United States Courts, Bankruptcy Court, Court of Appeals for Federal Circuit, Federal Judicial Center, Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation, Supreme Court. We've already talked about them. Several more that I won't mention. Recap, we've got 3 branches of government. I won't go through what they do. We've talked about that. But today we got pretty deep into the Supreme Court because it's relevant to things that are going on today. So I'd just like to wrap up by thanking you for tuning in, letting me enlighten you, brighten your perspective, and more importantly, empower you to do you. We're building blocks, building the democracy, one block at a time, from the bottom up, but move our voting forward. Next show, I'll continue our awareness, and we'll talk about the 4th article, Constitution, which is relationships between states. So, this is Regina Adams, signing off, saying, see you at the end of the week to give you something to share and take into the rest of your many weeks. Take care and keep getting it together.
Most times that's where it rests with you.
What do you say, Mom? Everything starts and ends with you.
That's right.
With you.
That's right.
That's interesting. So are we on the same page with that?
Yes, yes.
I do believe, though, how you engage. So I'll modify that now in 2022. How you engage, treat, and think about yourself.
Yes, rather than, because other people, whoever you're with a lot, that's family.
Mm-hmm. It can be family.
And then you got to consider how the family is.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot to be considered in all of this, but I think the main thing rests, like I say, with self.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Number 4. Number 4 in the letter was listen and don't fix. Oftentimes we share our frustrations and pains with you because we value the friendship within the relationship. Sometimes listening without judgment and not fixing goes a long way. Now, this is something. There's something very funny about this to me. Because I wrote this, as I said in the intro to this letter to men in this chapter. This was not just about my perspective. It was just about different conversations that I had had with other women. And one of the things that I think one of the themes that just kept occurring, like one of the reoccurring themes was sometimes we're talking to our mates and we expect them to just listen, and what they're doing is actually moving to fix it. And so we're feeling unheard and we're feeling uncared for because they're not listening to us. They're just trying to fix it, and how they want to fix it is not how I want to fix it. So I've heard a lot about that. What do you think about that?
I think it's, from the way you describe it, the person is just considering self. They aren't considering at what's going on with the other person. What's it? No, it's what I think, or way I expect it to be, or what I want.